Chapter 6. The Reverend Casey and young Tom stood on the hill and looked down on the Joad place. The small, unpainted house was mashed at one corner, and it had been pushed off its foundation so that it slumped at an angle, its blind front windows pointing at a spot of the sky well above the horizon. The fences were gone, and the cotton grew in the dooryard and up against the house, and the cotton was about the shed barn. The outhouse lay on its side, and the cotton grew close against it. Where the dooryard had been pounded hard by the bare feet of children, and by stamping horses' hoofs, and by the broad wagon wheels, it was cultivated now, and the dark green, dusty cotton grew. Young Tom stared for a long time at the ragged willow beside the dry horse trough, at the concrete base where the pump had been. "Jesus," he said at last, "hell must have popped here. There ain't nobody living there." At last he moved quickly down the hill, and Casey followed him. He looked into the barn shed, deserted, a little ground straw on the floor, and at the mule stall in the corner. And as he looked in, there was a skittering on the floor, and a family of mice faded in under the straw. Joad paused at the entrance to the tool shed lean-to, and no tools were there. A broken plow point, a mess of hay wire in the corner, an iron wheel from a hay rake, and a rat-gnawed mule collar, a flat-gallon oil can crusted with dirt and oil, and a pair of torn overalls hanging on a nail. "There ain't nothing left," said Joad. "We had pretty nice tools. There ain't nothing left." Casey said, "If I was still a preacher, I'd say the arm of the Lord has struck. But now I don't know what happened. I've been away. I didn't hear nothing." They walked toward the concrete well cap, walked through the cotton plants to get to it, and the bolls were forming on the cotton, and the land was cultivated. "We never planted here," Joad said. "We always kept this clear. Why, you can't get a horse in now without he trumps the cotton." They paused at the dry watering trough, and the proper weeds that should grow under a trough were gone, and the old thick wood of the trough was dry and cracked. On the well cap, the bolts that had held the pump stuck up, their threads rusty and the nuts gone. Joad looked into the tube of the well and listened. He dropped a clod down the well and listened. "She was a good well," he said. "I can't hear water." He seemed reluctant to go to the house. He dropped clod after clod down the well. "Maybe they're all dead," he said, "but somebody had told me. I'd got word some way. Maybe they left a letter or something to tell in the house. Would they have knowed you was coming out?" "I don't know," said Joad. "No, I guess not. I didn't know myself till a week ago." "Let's look in the house. She's all pushed out of shape. Something knocked the hell out of her." They walked slowly toward the sagging house. Two of the supports on the porch roof were pushed out so that the roof flopped down on one end, and the house corner was crushed in. Through a maze of splintered wood, the room at the corner was visible. The front door hung open inward, and a low, strong gate across the front door hung outward on the leather hinges. Joad stopped at the step, a 12-by-12 timber. "Doorstep's here," he said, "but they're gone, or Ma's dead." He pointed to the low gate across the front door. "If Ma was anywheres about, that gate be shut and hooked. That's one thing she always done, seen that gate was shut." His eyes were warm. Ever since the pig got in over to Jacob's and ate the baby, Millie Jacobs was just out in the barn. She come in while the pig was still eating. Well, Millie Jacobs was in a family way, and she went raving. Never did get over it. Touched ever since. But Ma took a lesson from it. She never left that pig gate open unless she was in the house herself. Never did forget. No, they're gone, or dead." He climbed to the split porch and looked into the kitchen. The windows were broken out, and throwing rocks lay on the floor, and the floor and wall sagged steeply away from the door, and the sifted dust was on the boards. Joad pointed to the broken glass and the rocks. "Kids," he said, "they'll go 20 miles to bust a window. I done it myself. They know when a house is empty. They know. That's the first thing kids do when folks moved out. The kitchen was empty of furniture, stove gone, and the round stovepipe in the hole in the wall showing light. On the sink shelf lay an old beer opener and a broken fork with its wooden handle gone. Joe slipped cautiously into the room, and the floor groaned under his weight. An old copy of the Philadelphia Ledger was on the floor against the wall, its pages yellow and curling. Joe looked into the bedroom. No bed, no chairs, nothing. On a wall, a picture of an Indian girl in color, labeled Red Wing. A bed slat leaning against the wall, and in one corner a woman's high button shoe, curled up at the toe and broken over the instep. Joe picked it up and looked at it. "I remember this," he said. "This was Ma's. It's all wore out now. Ma liked them shoes. Had 'em for years. No, they went and took everything." The sun had lowered until it came through the angled end windows now, and it flashed on the edges of the broken glass. Joe turned at last and went out and crossed the porch. He sat down on the edge of it and rested his bare feet on the 12-by-12 step. The evening light was on the fields, and the cotton plants threw long shadows on the ground, and the morning molting willow tree threw a long shadow. Casey sat down beside Joe. "They never wrote you nothing?" he asked. "No. Like I said, they wasn't people to write. Pa could write, but he wouldn't. Didn't like to. It gave him the shivers to write. He could work out a catalog order as good as the next fella, but he wouldn't write no letters for just ducks." They sat side by side, staring off into the distance. Chode laid his rolled coat out on the porch beside him. His independent hands rolled a cigarette, smoothed it, and lighted it, and he inhaled deeply and blew the smoke out through his nose. "Something's wrong," he said. "I can't put my finger on her. I got an itch that something's wronger than hell. Just this house been pushed around and my folks gone." Casey said, "Right over there the ditch was, where I done the baptizing. You wasn't mean, but you was tough. Hung on to that little girl's pigtails like a bulldog. We baptized you both in the name of the Holy Ghost, and you still hung on. Old Tom says, hold them underwater, so I shoved your head down till you start to bubbling before you to let go of that pigtail. You wasn't mean, but you was tough. Sometimes a tough kid grows up with a big jolt of spirit in him." A lean gray cat came sneaking out of the barn and crept through the cotton plants to the end of the porch. It leaped silently up to the porch and crept low belly toward the men. It came to a place between and behind the two, and then it sat down, and its tail stretched out straight and flat to the floor, and the last inch of it flicked. The cat sat and looked off into the distance where the men were looking. Joe glanced around at it. "By God, look who's here. Somebody stayed." He put out his hand, but the cat leaped away out of reach and sat down and licked the pads of its lifted paw. Joe looked at it, but his face was puzzled. "I know what's the matter," he cried. "That cat just made me figure what's wrong." "Seems to me there's lots wrong," said Casey. "No, it's more than just this place. Why didn't that cat just move in with some neighbors, with the Rances? How come nobody ripped some lumber off this house? Ain't been nobody here for 3-4 months, and nobody stole no lumber. Nice planks on the barn shed, pretty good planks on the house, window frames, and nobody took 'em. That ain't right. That's what was bothering me, and I couldn't catch a hold of her." "Well, what's that figure out for you?" Casey reached down and slipped off his sneakers and wriggled his long toes on the step. "I don't know. Seems like maybe there ain't any neighbors. If there was, would all them nice planks be here? Why, Jesus Christ, Albert Rance took his family and kids and dogs and all into Oklahoma City one Christmas. They was going to visit with Albert's cousin. Well, folks around here thought Albert moved away without saying nothing. Figured he maybe got debts or some woman squaring off at him. When Albert come back a week later, there wasn't a thing left in his house. Stove gone, beds was gone, the window frame was gone, and 8 feet of planking was gone off the south side of the house, so you could look right through her. He come driving home just as Muley Graves was going away with the doors and the well pump. Took Albert 2 weeks driving around the neighbors before he got all his stuff back." Casey scratched his toes luxuriously. Did nobody give him an argument? All of them just give the stuff up? Sure, they wasn't stealing it. They thought he left it, and they just took it. He got all of it back, all but a sofa pillow, velvet with a picture of an engine on it. Albert claimed Grandpa got engine blood, and that's why he wanted that picture. Well, Grandpa did get her, but he didn't give a damn about the picture on it. He just liked her. Used to pack her around, and he'd put her wherever he was going to sit. He never would give her back to Albert. Says, if Albert wants the pillow so bad, let him come and get her. But he better come shooting, 'cause I'll blow his goddamn stinking head off if he comes messing around my pillow. So finally, Albert gave up and made Grandpa a present of that pillow. He gave Grandpa ideas, though. He took to saving chicken feathers. Says he's gonna have a whole damn bed of feathers. But he never got no feather bed. One time, Pa got mad at a skunk under the house. Pa slapped that skunk with a 2x4, and Ma burnt all of Grandpa's feathers so we could live in the house. He left. Grandpa's a tough bastard. He just sat on that engine pillow and said, let Albert come and get her. Why, he says, I'll take that squirt and wring him out like a pair of drawers. The cat crept close between the men again, and its tail lay flat, and its whiskers jerked now and then. The sun dropped low toward the horizon, and the dusty air was red and golden. The cat reached out a gray, questioning paw and touched Joe's coat. He looked around. Hell, I forgot the turtle. I ain't gonna pack it all over hell. He unwrapped the land turtle and pushed it under the house. But in a moment it was out, headed southwest as it had been from the first. The cat leapt at it and struck it at its straining head and slashed at its moving feet. The old, hard, humorous head was pulled in, and the thick tail slapped in under the shell. And when the cat grew tired of waiting for it and walked it off, the turtle headed on southwest again. Young Tom Joad and the preacher watched the turtle grow, waving its legs and boosting its heavy, high-domed shell along toward the southwest. The cat crept along behind it for a while, but in a dozen yards it arched its back into a strong taut bow and yawned, and then came stealthily back toward the seated men. Where the hell you suppose he's going? Said Joad. I seen turtles all my life. They are always going someplace. They always seem to want to get there. The gray cat seated itself between and behind them again. It blinked slowly. The skin over its shoulders jerked forward under a flea, and then slipped slowly back. The cat lifted a paw and inspected it, flicked its claws out and in again, experimentally, and licked its pads with a shell-pink tongue. The red sun touched the horizon and spread out like a jellyfish, and the sky above it seemed much brighter and more alive than it had been. Joad unrolled his new yellow socks from his coat, and he brushed his dusty feet with his hand before he slipped them on. The preacher, staring off across the field, said, Somebody's coming. Look, down there, right through the cotton. Joad looked where Casey's finger pointed. Coming afoot, he said. Can't see him for the dust he raises. Who the hell is coming here? They watched the figure approaching in the evening light, and the dust it raised was reddened by the setting sun. Man, said Joad. The man grew closer, and as he walked, he passed the barn. Joad said, Why, I know him. You know him. That's Muley Graves. And he called, Hey, Muley, how ya? The approaching man stopped, startled by the call, and then he came on quickly. He was a lean man, rather short. His movements were jerky and quick. He carried a gunny sack in his hand. His blue jeans were pale at the knee and seat, and he wore an old black suit coat, stained and spotted, the sleeves torn loose from the shoulders and back, and ragged holes worn through at the elbows. His black hat was as stained as his coat, and the band, torn half free, flopped up and down as he walked. Muley's face was smooth and unwrinkled, but it wore the truculent look of a bad child's, the mouth held tight and small, the little eyes half scowling, half petulant. You remember Muley, Joe said softly to the preacher. Who's that? The advancing man called. Joe did not answer. Muley came close, very close, before he made out the face. Well, I'll be damned, he said. It's Tommy Jode. When'd you get out, Tommy? 2 days ago, said Jode. Took a little time to hitchhike home. And look here what I find. Where's my folks, Muley? What's the house all smashed up for? And cotton planted in the dooryard. By God, it's lucky I come by, said Muley, 'cause old Tom worried himself. When they was fixing to move, I was sitting in the kitchen there. I just told Tom I wasn't going to move, by God. I told him that, and Tom says I've been worrying myself about Tommy. Suppose he comes home and there ain't nobody here. What'll he think? I says, why didn't you write down a letter? And Tom says, maybe I will. I'll think about her. But if I don't, you keep your eye out for Tommy if you're still around. I'll be around, I says. I'll be around until hell freezes over. There ain't nobody who can run a guy named Graves out of this country, and they ain't done it neither. Jode said impatiently, where's my folks? Tell about you standing up to them later. Where's my folks? Well, they was gonna stick her out when the bank come tractoring off the place. Your grandpa stood out here with a rifle, and he blowed the headlights off that cat. But she come on just the same. Your grandpa didn't want to kill the guy driving that cat, and that was Willie Feely, and Willie knowed it. So he just come on and bumped the hell out of the house and give her a shake like a dog shakes a rat. Well, it took something out of Tom. Kind of got into him. He ain't been the same ever since. Where's my folks? Jode spoke angrily. What I'm telling you. Took 3 chips to your Uncle John's wagon. Took the stove and the pumps and the beds. You should have seen them beds go out with all the kids, and your grandma and grandpa setting up against the headboard, and your brother Noah sitting there smoking a cigarette and a spitting la-di-da over the side of the wagon. Jode opened his mouth to speak. They're all at your Uncle John's, Muley said quickly. Oh, all at John's. What they doing there? Now, stick to her for a second, Muley. Just stick to her. In just a minute, you can go on your way. What they doing there? Well, they've been chopping cotton, all of them, even the kids and your grandpa, getting money together so they can shove on west. Gonna buy a car and shove on west where it's easy living. There ain't nothing here. 50 cents a clean acre for chopping cotton, and folks begging for the chance to chop. And they ain't gone yet? No, said Muley. Not that I know. Last I heard was 4 days ago, when I seen your brother Noah shooting jackrabbits, and he says they're aiming to go in about 2 weeks. John got his notice. He got to get off. You just go on about 8 miles to John's place. You'll find your folks piled in John's house like gophers in a winter burrow. Okay, said Jode. Now you can ride on your own way. You ain't changed a bit, Muley. If you want to tell about something off northwest, you point your nose straight southeast. Muley said truculently, you ain't changed neither. You was a smart aleck kid, and you're still a smart aleck. You ain't telling me how to skin my life by any chances? Jode grinned. No, I ain't. If you want to drive your head into a pile of broken glass, there ain't nobody can tell you different. You know this here preacher, don't you, Muley? Reverend Casey? Why, sure. Then look over. Remember him well. Casey stood up, and the two shook hands. Glad to see you again, said Muley. You ain't been around for a hell of a long time. I've been off asking questions, said Casey. What happened here? Why are they kicking folks off the land? Muley's mouth snapped shut so tightly that a little parrot's beak in the middle of his upper lip stuck down over his underlip. He scowled. Them sons of bitches, he said. Them dirty sons of bitches. I tell you, man, I'm staying. They ain't getting rid of me. If they throw me off, I'll come back. And if they figure I'll be quiet underground, why, I'll take a couple, 3 of those sons of bitches along for company. He patted a heavy weight inside his side coat pocket. I ain't going. My pa come here 50 years ago, and I ain't going. Jode said, what's the idea of kicking folks off? Oh, they talk pretty about it. You know, what kind of years we've been having. Dust coming up and spoiling everything, so a man didn't get enough crop to plug up an ant's ass. And everybody got bills at the grocery. You know how it is. Well, the folks that owns the land says we can't afford to keep no tenants, and they says the share a tenant gets is just the profit, a margin of a profit we can't afford to lose. And they says if we put all our land in one piece, we can just hardly make her pay. so they tractored all the tenants off of the land. All except me, and by God, I ain't going. Tommy, you know me. You knowed me all your life. Damn right, said Joe, all my life. Well, you know I ain't a fool. I know this land ain't much good. Never was much good except for grazing. Never should have broke her up. And now, she's caught and damn near to death. If only they didn't tell me I got to get off. Why, I'd probably be in California right now, eating grapes and picking oranges when I wanted. But them sons of bitches say I got to get off, and Jesus Christ, man can't when he's told to. Sure, said Jode. I wonder Pa went so easy. I wonder Grandpa didn't kill nobody. Nobody never told Grandpa where to put his feet. And Ma ain't nobody you can push around neither. I seen her beat the hell out of a tin peddler with a live chicken one time, 'cause he gave her an argument. She had the chicken in one hand and the axe in the other, about to cut its head off. She aimed to go for that peddler with the axe, but she forgot which hand was which, and she takes after him with the chicken. Couldn't even eat that chicken when she got done. There wasn't nothing but a pair of legs in her hand. Grandpa throwed his hip out, joint laughing. How did my folks go so easy? Well, the guy that comes around and talks nice as pie. You gotta get off. It ain't my fault. Well, I says, whose fault is it? I'll go and nut the fella. It's the Shawnee Land and Cattle Company. I just got orders. Who's the Shawnee Land and Cattle Company? It ain't nobody. It's a company. Got a fella crazy. There wasn't nobody you could lay for. A lot of folks just got tired of looking at for something to be mad at, but not me. I'm mad at all of it. I'm staying. A large red drop of sun lingered on the horizon, and then dripped over and was gone, and the sky was brilliant over the spot where it had gone, and a torn cloud, like a bloody rag, hung over the spot of its going. And dusk crept over the sky from the eastern horizon, and darkness crept over the land from the east. The evening star flashed and glittered in the dark. The gray cat sneaked away toward the open barn shed, and passed inside like a shadow. Jode said, well, we ain't gonna walk in no 8 miles to Uncle John's place tonight. My dog is burned up. How's it if we go to your place, Muley? That's only about a mile. Won't do no good, Muley seemed embarrassed. My wife and the kids and her brother all took and went to California. There wasn't nothing to eat. They wasn't as mad as me, so they went. There wasn't nothing to eat here. The preacher stirred nervously. You should have went too. You shouldn't have broken up the family. I couldn't, said Muley Graves. Something just wouldn't let me. Well, by God, I'm hungry, said Jode. 4 solemn years I've been eating right on the minute. My guts is yelling bloody murder. What you gonna eat, Muley? How you been getting your dinner? Muley said ashamedly. For a while I ate frogs and squirrels and prairie dogs sometimes. Had to do it. But now I got some wire nooses on the tracks and the dry stream brush. Get rabbits and sometimes a prairie chicken. Skunks get caught, and coons too. He reached down, picked up his sack, and emptied it on the porch. 2 cottontails and a jackrabbit fell out and rolled over limply, soft and furry. God almighty, said Jode. It's more'n 4 years since I have eaten fresh killed meat. Casey picked up one of the cottontails and held it in his hand. You sharing with us, Muley Graves? He asked. Muley fidgeted in embarrassment. I ain't got no choice in the matter. He stopped on the ungracious sound of his words. That ain't like I mean it. He stumbled. What I mean, if a fella's got something to eat and another fella's hungry, why, the first fella ain't got no choice. I mean, suppose I pick up my rabbits and go off somewheres and eat them. See, I see, said Casey. I can see that. Muley sees something there, Tom. Muley's got a hold of something, and it's too big for him, and it's too big for me. Young Tom rubbed his hands together. Who got a knife? Let's get at these here miserable rodents. Let's get at 'em. Muley reached into his pants pocket and produced a large, horn-handled pocket knife. Tom Joad took it from him, opened the blade, and smelled it. He drove the blade again and again into the ground, and smelled it again. Wiped it on his trouser leg, and felt the edge with his thumb. Muley took a quart bottle of water out of his hip pocket and set it on the porch. Go easy on that there water, he said. That's all there is. This here well is filled in. Tom took up a rabbit in his hand. Why don't you go get some bale wire out of the barn? We'll make a fire with some of this broken plank from the house. He looked at the dead rabbit. There ain't nothing so easy to get ready as a rabbit, he said. He lifted the skin of the back, slit it, put his fingers in the hole, and tore the skin off. It slipped off like a stocking, slipped off the body to the neck, and off the legs to the paw. Jode picked up the knife again and cut off head and feet. He laid the skin down, slit the rabbit along the ribs, shook out the intestines onto the skin, and then threw the mess off into the cotton field. And the clean, muscled little body was ready. Jode cut off the legs and cut the meaty part back into 2 pieces. He was picking up the second rabbit when Casey came back with a snarl of bale wire in his hand. Now build up a fire and put some steaks up, said Jode. Jesus Christ, I'm hungry for these here creatures. He cleaned and cut the rest of the rabbits and strung them on a wire. Muley and Casey tore splintered boards from the wrecked house corner and started a fire, and they drove a stake into the ground on each side to hold the wire. Muley came back to Jode. Look out for the boils on the jackrabbit, he said. I don't like to eat no jackrabbit with boils. He took a little cloth bag from his pocket and put it on the porch. Jode said, the jack was clean as a whistle. Jesus, God, you got salt, too? By any chance you got some plates and a tent in your pocket? He poured salt in his hand and sprinkled it over the pieces of rabbit strung on the wire. The fire leaped and threw shadows on the house, and the dry wood crackled and snapped. The sky was almost dark now, and the stars were out sharply. The gray cat came out of the barn shed and trotted mowingly toward the fire, but nearly there it turned and went directly to one of the little piles of rabbit entrails on the ground. It chewed and swallowed, and the entrails hung from its mouth. Casey sat on the ground beside the fire, feeding it broken pieces of board, pushing the long boards in as the flame ate off their ends. The evening bats flashed into the firelight and out again. The cat crouched back and licked its lips and washed its face and whiskers. Jode held up his rabbit-laden wire between his 2 hands and walked to the fire. Here, take one end, Muley. Wrap your end around that stake. That's good. Now, let's tighten her up. We ought to wait till the fire's burned down, but I can't wait. He made the wire taut, then found a stick and slipped the pieces of meat along the wire until they were over the fire, and the flames licked up around the meat and hardened and glazed the surfaces. Jode sat down by the fire, but with his stick he moved and turned the rabbit so that it would not become sealed to the wire. This here is a party, he said. Salt, Muley's gun, and water and rabbits. I wish he got a pot of hominy in his pocket. That's all I wish, Muley said over the fire. You fellows think I'd touch the way I live. Touch nothing, said Jode. If you're touched, I wished everybody was touched. Muley continued, well, sir, it's a funny thing. Something went and happened to me when they told me I had to get off the place. First I was going to go and kill a whole flock of people. Then all my folks all went away out west, and I got wandering around, just walking around, never went far, slept where I was. I was going to sleep here tonight. That's why I come. I'd tell myself, I'm looking after things so when all the folks come back, it'll be all right. But I know that wasn't true. There ain't nothing to look after. The folks ain't never coming back. I'm just wandering around like a damn old graveyard ghost. Fella gets used to a place, it's hard to go, Casey. Fella gets used to a way of thinking, it's hard to leave. I ain't a preacher no more, but all the time I find I'm praying, not even thinking what I'm doing. Jode turned the pieces of meat over on the wire. The juice was dripping now, and every drop, as it fell in the fire, shot up a spurt of flame. The smooth surface of the meat was crinkling up and turning a faint brown. Smell her, said Jode. Jesus, look down and just smell her. Muley went on. Like a damn old graveyard ghost. I've been going around the places where stuff happened. Like there's a place over by our 40. In the gully, there's a bush. First time I ever laid with a girl was there. Me, 14, stamping and jerking and snorting like a buck deer. Randy as a billy goat. So I went there and I laid down on the ground, and I seen it all happen again. And there's the place down by the barn where Pa got gored to death by a bull, and his blood is right in that ground right now. Must be. Nobody ever never washed it out. And I put my hand on the ground where my own Pa's blood is a part of it. He paused uneasily. You fellas think I'm touched? Joe turned to me, and his eyes were inward. Casey, feet drawn up, stared into the fire. 15 feet back from the men, the fed cat was sitting, the long gray tail wrapped neatly around the front feet. A big owl shrieked as went overhead, and the firelight showed its white underside and the spread of its wings. No, said Casey, you're lonely, but you ain't touched. Muley's tight little face was rigid. I put my hand right on the ground where that blood is still, and I seen my Pa with a hole through his chest, and I felt him shiver up against me like he done, and I seen him kind of settle back and reach with his hands and his feet, and I seen his eyes all milky with hurt, and then he was still, and his eyes so clear, looking up. And me, a little kid, just sitting there, not crying nor nothing, just sitting there. He shook his head sharply. Joe turned the meat over and over, and I went in the room where Joe was born. Bed wasn't there, but it was the room, and all them things is true, and they're right in the place they happened. Joe came to life right there. He gave a big old gasp, and then he let out a squawk you could hear a mile, and his grandma standing there says, that's a daisy, over and over. And her so proud she bust 3 cups that night. Joe cleared his throat. I think we better eat her now. Let her get good and done. Good and brown, almost black, said Muley irritably. I want to talk. I ain't talked to nobody. If I'm touched, I'm touched. And that's the end of it. Like an old graveyard ghost, going to the neighbors' houses in the night. Peter's, Jacob's, Rance's, Jode's, and the houses all dark, standing like miserable ratty boxes. But there was good parties and dancing, and there was meetings and shouting glory. There was weddings in all them houses, and I'd want to go in town and kill folks, 'cause what'd they take when they tracted the folks off the land? What'd they get so their margin of profit was safe? They got Pa dying on the ground, and Joe yelling his first breath, and me jerking like a billy goat under a bush in the night. What'd they get? God knows the land ain't no good. Nobody been able to make a crop for years. But them sons of bitches at their desks, they just chop folks in two for their margin of profit. They just cut 'em in two. Place where folks lives is them folks. They ain't home, out lonely on the road, in a piled up car. They ain't alive no more. Them sons of bitches killed 'em. And he was silent, his thin lips still moving, his chest still panting. He sat and looked down at his hands in the firelight. I ain't talked to nobody for a long time, he apologized softly. I've been sneaking around like an old graveyard ghost. Casey pushed the long boards into the fire, and the flames licked up around them and leapt toward the meat again. The house cracked loudly as the cooler night air contracted the wood. Casey said quietly, I gotta see them folks that's gone out on the road. I got a feeling I got to see them. They gonna need help no preaching can give 'em. Hope of heaven when their lives ain't lived. Holy Spirit when their own spirit is downcast and sad. They gonna need help. They got to live before they can afford to die. Jode cried nervously, Jesus Christ. Let's eat this meat before it gets smaller than a cooked mouse. Look at her. Smell her. He leapt to his feet and slid the pieces of meat along the wire until they were clear of the fire. He took Muley's knife and sawed through a piece of meat until it was free of the wire. Here's for the preacher, he said. I told you, I ain't no preacher. Well, here's for the man then. He cut off another piece. Here, Muley, if you ain't too goddamn upset to eat, this here is Jackrabbit, tougher'n a bull bitch. He sat back and clamped his long teeth on the meat and tore out a great bite and chewed it. Jesus Christ, hear her crunch, and he tore out another bite ravenously. Muley still sat regarding his meat. Maybe I oughtn't have talked like that, he said. A fella should maybe keep his stuff like that in his head. Casey looked over, his mouth full of rabbit. He chewed, and his muscled throat convulsed in swallowing. Yes, you should talk, he said. Sometimes a sad man can talk the sadness right out through his mouth. Sometimes a killing man can talk the murder right out of his mouth and not do no more murder. You done right. Don't you kill nobody if you can help it. And he bit out another hunk of rabbit. Jode tossed the bones in the fire and jumped up and cut off more of the wire. Muley was eating slowly now, and his nervous little eyes went from one to the other of his companions. Jode ate, scowling like an animal, and a ring of grease formed around his mouth. For a long time, Muley looked at him, almost timidly. He put down the hand that held the meat. Tommy, he said. Jode looked up and did not stop gnawing the meat. Yeah, he said, around a mouthful. Tommy, you ain't mad with me talking about killing people? You ain't huffy, Tom? No, said Tom, I ain't huffy. It's just something that happened. Everybody knowed it was no fault of yours, said Muley. Old man Turnbull said he was gonna get you when you come out. Says nobody can kill one of his boys. All the folks hereabouts talked him out of it, though. We was drunk, Jode said softly, drunk at a dance. I don't know how she started. And then I felt that knife go in me, and that severed me up. First thing I see is Herb coming for me again with his knife. There was this here shovel leaning against the schoolhouse, so I grabbed it and smacked him over the head. I never had nothing against Herb. He was a nice fella. Had come a bullying after my sister was Sharon when he was a little fella. No, I liked Herb. Well, everybody told his pa that and finally cooled him down. Somebody says there's Hatfield blood on his mother's side in old Turnbull, and he's got to live up for it. I don't know about that. Him and his folks went on to California 6 months ago. Jode took the last of the rabbit from the wire and passed it around. He settled back and ate more slowly now, chewed evenly and wiped the grease from his mouth with his sleeve, and his eyes, dark and half-closed, brooded as he looked into the dying fire. Everybody's going west, he said. I got me a parole to keep. Can't leave the state. Parole? Muley asked. I heard about them. How do they work? Well, I got out early, 3 years early. There's stuff I gotta do, or they send me back in. Got to report ever so often. How did he treat you in there? In McAllister. My woman's cousin was in McAllister, and they gave him hell. It ain't so bad, said Jode. Like every place else. They give you hell if you raise hell. You get along okay, unless some guard gets it in for you. Then you catch plenty hell. I got along okay. Minded my own business, like any guy would. I learned to write nice as hell. Words and stuff like that, too. Not just word writing. My old man will be sore when he sees me whip out a bird in one stroke. Pa's gonna be mad when he sees me do that. He don't like no fancy stuff like that. He don't even like word writing. Kinda scares him, I guess. Every time Pa's seen writing, somebody took something away from him. They didn't give you no beans, nothing like that? No, I just tend to my own affairs. Of course, you get goddamn good and sick at doing the same thing day after day for 4 years. If you done something you was ashamed of, you might think about that. But hell, I seen Herb Turnbull coming for me with a knife right now. I'd squash him down with a shovel again. Anyone would, said Muley. The preacher stared into the fire, and his high forehead was white in the settling dark. The flash of the little flames picked out of the cords of his neck. His hands, clasped about his knees, were busy pulling nettles. Jode threw the last bones into the fire and licked his fingers, and then wiped them on his pants. He stood up and brought the bottle of water from the porch, took a sparing drink, and passed the bottle before he sat down again. He went on. The thing that gave me the most trouble was it didn't make no sense. You don't look for no sense when lightning kills a cow or it comes up a flood. That's just the way things is. But when a bunch of men take and lock you up for years, it ought to have some meaning. Men are supposed to think things out. Here they put me in and keep me and feed me for years. That ought to either make me so I won't do her again, or else punish me so I'll be afraid to do her again. He paused. But if Herb or if anybody else come for me, I'd do her again. Do her before I could figure her out, especially if I was drunk. That sort of senselessness kind of worries a man. He observed. Judge says he gave you a light sentence 'cause it wasn't all your fault. Judd said, there's a guy in McAllister, lifer. He studies all the time. He's secretary of the warden. Writes the warden's letters and stuff like that. Well, he's one hell of a bright guy, and he reads law and all stuff like that. Well, I talked to him one time about her, 'cause he reads so much stuff. And he says it don't do no good to read books. He says he's read everything about prisons now and in the old times. And he says she makes less sense to him now than she did before he starts reading. He says it's a thing that started way to hell and gone back, and nobody seems to be able to stop her, and nobody got sense enough to change her. He says for God's sakes, don't read about her, because he says for one thing you'll just get messed up worse, and for another you won't have no respect for the guys that work with the governments. I ain't got a hell of a lot of respect for him now, said Muley. Only kind of government we got that leads on us fellas is a safe margin of profit. There's one thing that got me stumped, and that's Willie Feely driving that cat, and gonna be a straw boss on land his own folks used to farm. That worries me. I can see how a fellow might come from some other place and not know better, but Willie belongs. Worried me so, I went up to him and asked him. Right off he got mad. I got 2 little kids, he says. I got a wife and my wife's mother. Them people gotta eat. It's matter in hell. First and only thing I got to think about is my own folks, he says. What happens to other folks is their lookout. He says it seems like he's shamed, so he gets mad. Jim Casey had been staring at the dying fire, and his eyes had grown wider, and his neck muscles stood higher. Suddenly he cried, I got her. If ever a man got a dose of the spirit, I got her. Got her all of the flash. He jumped to his feet and paced back and forth, his head swinging. Had a tent one time. Draw out as much as 500 people every night. That's before either of you fellas seen me. He stopped and faced them. Ever notice I never took no collection when I was preaching out here to folks in barns and in the open? By God, you never, said Muley. People around here got so used to not giving you money, they got to being a little mad when some other preacher came along and passed the hat. Yes, sir. I took something to eat, said Casey. I took a pair of pants when mine was worn out, and an old pair of shoes when I was walking through the ground, but it wasn't like when I had the tent. Some days I'd take in $10 or $20. Wasn't happy that way, so I gave her up, and for a time I was happy. I think I got her now. I don't know if I can say her. I guess I won't try to say her. But maybe there's a place for a preacher. Maybe I could preach again. Folks out lonely on the road, folks with no land, no home to go to. They got to have some kind of home. Maybe. He stood over the fire. The 100 muscles on his neck stood out in high relief, and the firelight went deep into his eyes and ignited red embers. He stood and looked at the fire, his face tense as though he were listening, and the hands that had been active to pick, to handle, to throw ideas grew quiet, and in a moment crept into his pocket. The bats flittered in and out the dull firelight, and the soft, watery burble of a nighthawk came from across the fields. Tom reached quietly into his pocket and brought out his tobacco, and he rolled a cigarette slowly and looked over at the coals while he worked. He ignored the whole speech of the preacher as though it were some private thing that should not be inspected. He said, "Night after night in my bunk I figured how she'd be when I come home again. I figured maybe Grandpa and Grandma'd be dead, and maybe there'd be some new kids. Maybe Pa not be so tough. Maybe Ma'd sit back a little and let her Sharon do the work. I knowed it wouldn't be the same as it was. Well, we'll sleep here, I guess, and come daylight, we'll get on to Uncle John. Leastwise, I will. You think you're coming along, Casey?" The preacher still stood looking into the coals. He said slowly, "Yeah, I'm going with you. And when your folks start out on the road, I'm going with them. And where folks are on the road, I'm going to be with them." "You're welcome," said Jode. "Ma always favored you, said you was a preacher to trust." Rose Sharon wasn't growed up then. He turned his head. "Muley, you gonna walk on over with us?" Muley was looking toward the road over which they had come. "Think you'll come along, Muley?" Jode repeated. "Huh? No, I don't go no place, and I don't leave no place. See that glow over there, jerking up and down? That's probably the superintendent of this stretch of cotton. Somebody maybe seen our fire." Tom looked. The glow of light was nearly over the hill. "We ain't doing no harm," he said. "We'll just sit here. We ain't doing nothing." Muley cackled. "Yeah, we're doing something just being here. We're trespassing. We can't stay. They've been trying to catch me for 2 months. Now, you look. If that's a car coming, we go out in the cotton and lay down. Don't have to go too far. Then by God, let 'em try and find us. Have to look up and down every row. Just keep your head down." Joe demanded, "What's come over you, Muley? You was never no run and hide fella. You was mean." Muley watched the approaching lights. "Yeah," he said, "I was mean like a wolf. Now I'm mean like a weasel. When you're hunting something, you're a hunter, and you're strong. Can't nobody beat a hunter. But when you get hunted, that's different. Something happens to you. You ain't strong. Maybe you're fierce, but you ain't strong. I've been hunted now for a long time. I ain't a hunter no more. I'd maybe shoot a fella in the dark, but I don't maul nobody with a fence stake no more. It don't do no good to fool you or me. That's how it is." "Well, you go and hide," said Jode. "Leave me and Casey to tell these bastards a few things." The beam of light was closer now, and it bounced into the sky and then disappeared, and then bounced up again. All three men watched. Muley said, "There's one more thing about being hunted. You get to thinking about all the dangerous things. If you're hunting, you don't think about 'em, and you ain't scared. Like you says to me, if you get in any trouble, they'll send you back to McAllister to finish your time." "That's right," said Jode. "That's what they told me, but sitting here resting or sleeping on the ground, that ain't getting in no trouble. That ain't doing nothing wrong. That ain't like getting drunk or raising hell." Muley laughed. "You'll see. You just sit here and the car'll come. Maybe it's Willie Feely, and Willie's deputy sheriff now. 'What you doing trespassing here?' Willie says. Well, you always did know Willie wasn't full of crap, so he says, 'What's it to you?' Willie gets mad and says, 'You get off or I'll take you in.' And you ain't gonna let no Feely push you around 'cause he's mad and scared. He's made a bluff, and he got to go on with it. And here's you getting tough, and you got to go through. Oh, hell, it's a lot easier to lay out in the cotton and let 'em look. It's more fun, too. 'Cause when they're mad and can't do nothing, and you're out there laughing at 'em, but you just talk to Willie or any boss, and you'll slug hell out of 'em, and they'll take you in and run you back to McAllister for 3 years. You're talking sense," said Jode. "Every word you say is sense. But Jesus, I hate to get pushed around. I'd lots rather take a sock at Willie." "He got a gun," said Muley. "He'll use it 'cause he's a deputy. Then he either got to kill you, or you got to get his gun away and kill him. Come on, Tommy. You can easy tell yourself you're fooling them, lying out like that. And it's all just amounts to what you tell yourself." The strong lights angled up into the sky now, and the even drone of a motor could be heard. "Come on, Tommy. Don't have to go too far. Just 14-15 rows over, and we can watch what they do." Tom got to his feet. "By God, you're right," he said. "I ain't got a thing in the world to win, no matter how it comes out. Come on, then. Over this way." Muley moved around the house and out into the cotton field about 50 yards. "This is good," he said. "Now lay down. You only got to pull your head down if they start the spotlight going. It's kind of fun." The three men stretched out at full length and propped themselves on their elbows. Muley sprang up and ran toward the house, and in a few moments he came back and threw a bundle of coats and shoes down. They'd take him along just to get even, he said. The lights topped the rise and bore down on the house. Jode asked, "Won't they come out here with flashlights, looking around for us? I wish I had a sick." Muley giggled. "No, they won't. I told you I'm mean like a weasel. Willie done that one night, and I clipped him from behind with a fence stake. Knocked him colder than a wedge." He told later how 5 guys come at him. The car drew up to the house, and the spotlight snapped on. "Duck," said Muley. The bar of cold white light swung over their heads and crisscrossed the field. The hiding men could not see any movement, but they heard a car door slam, and they heard voices. "Scared to get in the light," Muley whispered. "Once, twice, I've took a shot at the headlights. That keeps Willie careful. He got somebody with him tonight." They heard footsteps on wood, and then, from inside the house, they saw the glow of a flashlight. "Shall I shoot through the window?" Muley whispered. They couldn't see where it come from. Give them something to think about. "Sure, go ahead," said Jode. "Don't do it," Casey whispered. "It won't do no good. Just a waste. We got to get thinking about doing stuff that means something." A scratching sound came from near the house. "Putting out the fire," Muley whispered, kicking dust over it. The car door slammed. The headlights swung around and faced the road again. "Now duck," said Muley. They dropped their heads, and the spotlight swept over them and crossed and recrossed the cotton field. And then the car started and slipped away and topped the rise and disappeared. Muley sat up. "Willie always tries that last flash. He done it so often I can time him, and he still thinks it's cute." Casey said, "Maybe they left some fellas at the house. They'd catch us when we come back. Maybe. You fellas wait here. I know this game." He walked quietly away, and only a slight crunching of clods could be heard from his passage. The 2 waiting men tried to hear him, but he had gone. In a moment he called from the house. "They didn't leave nobody. Come on back." Casey and Jode struggled up and walked back toward the black bulk of the house. Muley met them near the smoking dust pile, which had been their fire. "I didn't think they'd leave nobody," he said proudly. "Me knocking Willie over and taking a shot at the lights once, twice keeps them careful. They ain't sure who it is, and I ain't gonna let 'em catch me. I don't sleep near no house. If you fellas want to come along, I'll show you where to sleep, where they ain't nobody gonna stumble over ya." "Lead off," said Jode. "We'll follow you. I never thought I'd be hiding out in my old man's place." Muley set off across the field, and Jode and Casey followed him. They kicked the cotton plants as they went. "You'll be hiding from lots of stuff," said Muley. They marched in a single file across the fields. They came to a water cut and slid easily down to the bottom of it. "By God, I bet I know," cried Jode. "Is it a cave in the bank?" "That's right. How'd you know?" "I dug her," said Jode. "Me and my brother Noah dug her. Looking for gold, we says we was, but we was just digging caves like kids always does." The walls of the water cut were above their heads now. "Ought to be pretty close," said Jode. "Seems to me I remember her pretty close." Muley said, "I've covered her with brush. Nobody could find her." The bottom of the gulch leveled off, and the footing was sand. Jode settled himself on the clean sand. "I ain't gonna sleep in no cave," he said. "I'm gonna sleep right here." He rolled his coat and put it under his head. Muley pulled at the covering brush and crawled into his cave. "I like it in here," he called. "I feel like nobody can come at me." Jim Casey sat down on the sand beside Jode. "Get some sleep," said Jode. "We'll start looking for Uncle John's at daybreak." "I ain't sleeping," said Casey. "I got too much to puzzle with." He drew up his feet and clasped his legs. He threw back his head and looked at the sharp stars. Jode yawned and brought one hand back under his head. They were silent, and gradually the skittering of life on the ground, of holes and burrows, of the brush, began again. The gophers moved, and the rabbits crept to green things. The mice scampered over the clods, and the winged hunters moved soundlessly overhead.